that Leslie sent to me. I thought that was pretty funny. Hi, everybody. It's so great to see everybody this evening. I am going to start officially in just a moment or two. For those of you who are joining us, we are going to get started here in just a couple minutes. We'll give people, I see people are coming on in, so we will go ahead and get started in just a moment. Hi, everyone. It's Carolyn Ducey from the International Quilt Museum at the University of Nebraska. We're so glad you're here tonight with us. Gosh, we have a tremendous showing tonight, about almost 90 people here, and it's going to be a really fun presentation with Lana Rubin. Luana is going to join us in a moment, but first I'd like to introduce Luana to you all. Lana Rubin is the president and co-owner of eQuilter.com, an online fabric retailer in Boulder, Colorado. 2% of all of eQuilter sales go to charities focused on the environment and human rights. And they've raised $1.7 million for those organizations over 20 years. Luana Rubin has worked as a designer in the textile, garment, and quilt industry since 1980. She's a chairholder for the International Trend Forecasting Organization, the Color Marketing Group, and she's a photographer and world traveler documenting both wildlife and quilt festivals in 49 countries so far. Tonight, Luana is going to present to us Mad Men, the Mid-Century Modern Aesthetic, and Modern Quilts. If you have any questions, please send them to the chat. While Luana is speaking, I'm going to be trying to get those organized, and when we wrap up her presentation, we will work on questions. So please let me know what you'd like to know from Luana. And now I am just so pleased to ask Luana to join us.
Hi.
Hi, it's so good to have you here.
It's great to join all of you, and I'm really glad that everybody could join us too. We've been apart for way too long.
Yeah, we have, haven't we? And it's been a rough year. And, you know, it's so interesting to me. There's a great little community in Lincoln here that is these wonderful mid-century homes. And I really didn't know about that area until somewhat recently, and then met a couple people who live there. And I am so intrigued with this mid-century modern aesthetic now. So I just can't wait to see what you have for us.
Well, go and visit Palm Springs when things get back to normal. That's a great place to investigate that in the architecture as well.
Great.
That's great. Okay, well, I'm excited about this. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and get over here to my first slide. There we go. Good.
Looks good.
Okay. Well, I have a little story to share with you guys first. Many years ago, I was at the Color Marketing Group, which is an international trend forecasting organization that I belong to. And we were talking about all of these indications of a mid-century modern trend bubbling up in all different aspects of design. And I remember at the time thinking, wow, well, there's no doubt that that's going to come up in our industry. I can't wait to see what it is. Right about that time, there was a big spread. I think it was the September issue in Vogue about Mad Men. And so that was part of what got us talking about it. Like, look, here it is. It's even in Vogue. You know, we have to talk about this, about the colors, about the design aesthetic, and so on. And so I've watched how that design aesthetic of Mad Men was a trend catalyst or a trend driver. And it was just so exciting to see what unfolded. So I don't know how many of you actually watched the show. I have to admit, I didn't watch every single episode, but I was very aware of the style that was being expressed through that show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to know, to just think about the overlap of the modern quilt group and when QuiltCon got started, for instance, and when that show is actually running. So here you see the years that it was running, 2007 to 2015. But what's even more important is what years in the past was the show set in. Well, basically, it covered the 60s, and it ended in 1970, which was a very transitional year. And when you look it up on Wikipedia and so on, you know, there's a lot of information about the show online. Some people are willing to claim that it was the greatest TV show ever created at the time, up until then. But, you know, they even had their own Barbie dolls, which is always a sign of success. You can see there's a notation. There are 16 Emmys, 5 Golden Globes. And there's a TV guide that was asking that question. Is it the best TV show on TV? Well, it certainly was a trend driver. In fact, there were exhibits about the style of Mad Men afterwards. And so here was an exhibit at the Museum of the Moving Image in New York City. And I'll have
So interesting to see all of those colors kind of presented in one slide like this. All the
exactly. It's a very sharp eye you have there, Carolyn. So I'm going to invite all of you to look at these images. I'm going to be sharing with you design and art and color images that all feed into this timeline that culminates in modern quilts. And then I'm going to give you a little quilt show at the end. So some of the color and design, which I happen to really love, were Pucci prints. And if you don't know who Pucci was, he did these really large scale, wild, crazy, colorful prints. And they were distinctive because really nothing like that had been done before. And here's some other examples of his work in the show and also in the museum exhibit. But it's a lot more interesting to see it on the girl with her hairdo and her jewelry, right?
I like that big woof, you know, big hair.
Yes. There's another example of Pucci, a really great example.
Yes.
Beautiful prints and colors.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a cosmetics line that was inspired by Mad Men. And take a look at the colors. You know, those very particular shades of pastel pink, kind of a coral salmon pink, and then the packaging with the blue and the yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you Google Mad Men design or Mad Men colors, you will come across images like this that have been made since then, obviously, but they're a really great expression of the inspiration we derived from Mad Men. And I would say that it goes far beyond Mad Men. I mean, when you look at the images of the sets, you know, they're okay. We can see the mid-century modern design aesthetic, but it inspired us to greater heights of mid-century modern creativity and design.
Mm-hmm.
And there are actually books on the colors and the design of Mad Men. I actually have a friend who I know from when I lived in New York City working in the garment industry. She's an artist, but her husband, who we lost a couple years ago, but he was literally one of the Mad Men. So these were advertising agencies on Madison Avenue in New York, in case you're not familiar with the show.
That furniture takes me back. I mean, I'm a child of the 60s, and it's kind of fun to see all that.
It is. And then here's a book, an official illustrated book about Mad Men. And of course, the cocktail culture sprang from this time as well. I don't think we can give complete credit to Mad Men, but certainly it helped because, you know, they were always drinking on the show, right?
They kept that bottle in the desk in their drawer, in the drawer of their desk. Yes.
Right. Yeah, the men, and then the women drank cocktails that sort of matched their outfit. So here are some examples of art that was inspired by Mad Men and by mid-century modern. And, you know, you can start to see some of the influences that we will see later in quilts. And I'm sure if any of you have been exposed to modern quilts, you recognize some of these motifs and colors. The other thing that is very parallel to modern quilt making is architecture and modern architecture with all these incredible geometric designs that look like quilts, don't they?
They do. And the curves is something I hadn't really thought about. I was thinking of much more straight lines, but
yeah.
Even in the furniture, you see that in the chairs and things. I love that.
Right. Well, we do see modern quilts now that have gradient shapes. So when you think about gradient fabric and look at this top left image, yeah, that's part of where it's coming from. But there's a lot of inspiration out there. You know, if you're thinking, wow, I don't know where to begin making a modern quilt, here are some ideas that could be translated into the abstract and asymmetrical design of modern quilting.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I mean, every time I look at these images, I go, oh yeah, I remember seeing a quilt just like that.
It does. It does really make you think of that. I love that with the color inset in the window wells there. Wow.
And then of course it can come inside and it can go into the accessories, you know, like they put them on the balcony. I think this was a hotel on the left, on the floor. So I wanted to show you just a lot of inspiration, you know, a lot of color reference and design inspiration, again, that's leading us on this journey. We're going to go forward and backward in time a few times on this little journey.
And Luana, when you talk about the mid-century modern, are you thinking mostly of the 60s?
Yes, but you know, trends don't ever stop and start on an exact date. So you could see those trends building up in the very late 50s, and then you could see how they transitioned into the 70s. And I find that I think transition areas are quite fascinating because that's where there's a lot of creativity. As one thing is ending and the next one is starting, there's so much creative energy in the overlap.
Interesting. Oh yeah, that some of that is so familiar. It's strange to be looking back at it, but it is so beautiful and contemporary, and the colors are so vivid and bright. I love that.
I'm sure you're all aware that there's a lot of orange out there these days. And remember several years ago, the color of the year was a shade of orange and people complained bitterly about it, but it kind of opened the door for us to be open to that once again. Just like we were all sick of harvest gold and avocado green and all those 70s colors, right? But then some time passed by, we kind of recovered, and then we saw slightly different versions of that, and we're open to it again. So these days, you're likely to see the orange combined with that hot, deep pink or purple, or violet, you know, like these are two examples of that.
Well, that is not my mom's orange canisters on the counter anymore, but we definitely had those.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was my mom's wallpaper, yellow and orange big flowers on the kitchen wall. And, you know, there's a lot of abstract painterly art that is being translated into fabrics these days, in addition to the geometric. And of course, if you cut up that fabric into a geometric piece, then it takes on a life of its own. So you can see on the left here, we have something that kind of looks like somebody cut up patterns, right? And put them together to create a secondary image.
Yeah.
Now, I want to mention Lee Eisman. Lee Eisman is the person who helps to choose, and then she announced to the media, the Pantone color of the year. So the Pantone color of the year is a color that's closer to what's happening on the consumer level. And then when we get together for the color marketing group, we're projecting colors 2 to 5 years in the future. But she has written this fantastic book. I just love this book, The 20th Century in Color. And inside, every decade has photos and colors. And I find that really inspiring. So just in case you missed that, make a note of that book. If you put it in your library, you won't regret it. And Lee is one of my mentors and friends, one of the first people I met when I joined the organization. So here are some of those retro colors that we love so much. Man, I wish I had a fridge like that right now.
I was just going to say that. I want that fridge.
But you know, their designers are making refrigerators in these retro colors now. You're not going to get them at Home Depot or Lowe's, I don't think, but they are available.
Wow. Oh, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that pink, but that's a color you either love or hate, I think.
Yeah.
Especially that refrigerator Pepto
Yes.
Bismol pink. Yeah.
When I was going to design school in LA, I had a close friend who had a beach house in Venice. I was just thinking about it the other day. And the bathroom and the kitchen were all that pink, and the kitchen was black and white checkerboard floor, and I was totally lusting over that floor. But you know, another big color trend that we're going to see continuing to grow in the next year is the yellow greens. And it does have its roots in this mid-century modern. And you'll see these colors coming up as I go through the presentation here.
You know, I'm curious, Lana, when you predict a color or when you determine the color of the year, I don't understand. Is it you are predicting a color that then designers are going to make it a point to use? Or are you seeing things that are already appearing in culture that then you see are just taking on more importance?
Yeah, you know, it's both. So what we see indications of a trend bubbling up among early adopters and artists generally. And also in pop culture, you know, you'll see hints of it bubbling up. And then at some point it becomes a trend and the public grabs onto it and it becomes very popular. So if you're a designer, you want to be on the front end of that. If you're coming up with the color palette and designing products that are going to come out a year from now, as we do in our industry, you would like to have a head start on those colors. You don't want to be looking at what's out there and popular now. You want to predict what will be popular.
Yes.
Now, you know, there was a particular 70s orange, but it has had a remake for our times now. So there, you know, you might see something that reminds you of a creamsicle. You might see something that reminds you of a kind of a mango or marigold. So they're not just a plain flat orange, you know, they're a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler, a little bit sassier. But orange is definitely having an extended moment in this trend.
It is a sassy color.
It is. And you have to be a sassy woman to wear that color, but we don't necessarily think about wearing it. We think about putting it into our quilts and our fiber art and our textile art and our textile designs.
Yeah.
I just thought this was great because her jacket, it looks like it's a piece quilt, right? And that's also a very big trend. Like right now, the couture lines that are being shown for next year are showing a lot of patchwork.
Oh, fun.
So, you know, these are just some images from different industries that I picked up, and the one on the right is retro, but it's amazing how these images and colors do repeat with time.
Mhm.
And you may notice or pick up on particular colors, but you can see there's that aqua, there's that yellow green, the pink. You can see some kind of mauve-y purple colors in there that are quite important. Sometimes those colors are darker or lighter, they're more or less saturated, but I would say that in general, there are a lot of midtones in the mid-century modern color palette. So then as an artist, you have to decide, how are you going to create excitement? Well, you have to bring in maybe complementary colors. You have to bring in a contrast of values. So think about that, you know, as we move towards the end of the slideshow and look at quilts. So here are just some really fun images of mid-century modern design, textile design. It's a clock, but really it could be a textile, right? There were a lot of great abstract prints in vintage bark cloth. You know what bark cloth is? That heavy nubby. You can cover a chair with it. You can make a jacket out of it.
I have bark cloth curtains at home because my house was built in 1947. So they're getting threadbare and I can't bear to take them down. So
yeah, well, you know, bark cloth kind of comes and goes, but we try to carry it when we can get it. That's the key point, when we can get it. Sometimes it's just not available. Excuse me.
Oh, good old Barbie.
Good old Barbie. And, you know, variations on pink, pink and green, pink and aqua.
Yeah.
And you will see these shapes and these design ideas in some of the quilts I'm going to show you later. So this is kind of like a memory card matching game.
It's really fun to see the trends because you really do see how the colors are used over and over, and also in different combinations that are so fascinating.
Now, some of these images of retro design I actually showed in a presentation about the history of mid-century design at the very first QuiltCon, because, you know, retro textile, it's not going to change. It is what it is. So that's some of what you're seeing here, but it's fun to reference those. And some of them are more or less important as time goes by. There's also a big trend happening now with large-scale imported West African prints. So actually the print in the middle is an African print, but you can see how it relates to other fabric designs and other, you know, fashion designs and quilt designs. And there you can see that the dress on the left really looks like a quilt, like a piece quilt.
Yeah.
And I just happen to really love that kind of chartreuse black and white print on the dress on the right side.
That looks very familiar to me. I don't know why, but it looks very familiar.
Okay. So black and white is obviously a trend. It never really goes away. It just reinvents itself. And at QuiltCon, I'm not going to show you that particular group, but at QuiltCon, there was a whole huge exhibit of black and white quilts with writing on them.
Nice.
And then we have the zigzags. And again, note those colors. You can see those colors repeating there.
Do you find that these motifs are also something that is predicted or that is a trend?
Yeah, the design motifs are trends that cycle over time. You know, they may cycle over decades, but, you know, these really make me think more of the early 70s. But they were starting in the 60s. That's why I mean that some trends will overlap. You know, when we have the benefit of distance of time, we think, oh, the 60s is one thing, the 70s is another thing. But if you look at 69 and 70, but also 59 and 60 and 61, you'll see that those influences are kind of mixed and overlapping. Now here's some more of those prints that always make me think of bark cloth.
Yes. I love that skirt. Oh.
I know. I just watched a group of shorts called Inside Pixar. It's like 5-10 minute little inside vignettes of people who work at Pixar. And one of them was this woman who's an artistic director. And she is so fashionable, and she wears retro clothes, and she wears big brooches, and her hair is all done up. I highly recommend that little tiny mini series. You can watch it all within an hour. If you like this kind of thing, you get a kick out of that. And here we see more of the neutral colors, which is definitely part of that mid-century. But you can see the midtones in there, right? And then they're contrasting, that's bouncing off of the midtones, darker and lighter, hot tones, solid against pattern, and so on. So there are a lot of ways to create contrast, which creates interest for the eye. And look at these. I mean, every single one of these could be a quilt, right?
Yes, they
There's
could.
so much overlap between fashion and fashion textile design and quilting, particularly modern quilting.
Yeah.
I get such a kick out of it. Oh, look, there's a cathedral window.
I know.
And, we've seen a big trend of trixelating images. So you know what pixelated images are, right? So trixelating an image is turning it into triangles instead of squares. So this was the beginning of that on the right. And then on the left here, we have more of these, vintage fashion that looks like a quilt.
That's a new term for me. I learned something new tonight.
Which one? Trixelated?
Pixelating.
Yeah. Okay, well, here's just some really fun retro goodies. And think about shapes and think about style when you look at these images.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The record player.
My 18-year-old daughter wants a turntable. Cracks me up.
Yeah, there's something that's come back, hasn't it?
Yep,
Just circled
exactly.
right back.
Yep.
It is fascinating because all of these shapes we saw in your textiles. So they are, you can see how it translates so wonderfully across these mediums.
Right. Have you ever been to It's a Small World in Disneyland?
No.
That's what oh, really? Oh my gosh.
I've never been to Disneyland, so.
Oh my God, you poor thing. Well, I think you need to put that on your list. Okay, well, that is, just look it up. You ride on a little boat through a canal, and okay, look at the image of the guy here in the middle. See all those shapes? Basically, you're riding through a ride with all these pastel geometric shapes like this, and it's also children of the world singing this song, which by the end you get kind of sick of. It's a small world after all. You probably heard it.
I do know that song.
Okay,
Oh, yes.
Yeah. When you look at it, that song, it becomes an earworm. In fact, I'll be probably humming it to myself for the rest of the evening. Sorry about that, guys.
It is one of those, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so we're going to go into some more Mad Men style. And what a stylish era. And just like this Inside Pixar little clip that I mentioned to you, when you see this woman in her outfits, it makes you want to dress up again.
Yes.
But, this is what was happening at the time. And it's inspiring to us because, we live in an era of sweatpants and t-shirts, especially now, right? Since we've all been staying home.
Yep.
And it's fun to look at this and think, oh, I could do that again in a few months, I hope.
Oh, yes.
And of course,
especially
travel.
This one.
Yeah, yes. Travel was so glamorous and so exotic. I was lucky to travel overseas on Pan Am at the beginning of my fashion design career, so I remember that very clearly. I got dressed up to fly to Hong Kong the very first time in 1982. And then, of course, another expression of that retro travel vibe is in trailers. Now, my grandparents had one of those silver bullet Airstreams. So again, there's a sentimental attachment that I have. So not only are people buying these and decorating them, but there are also a lot of textile designs that depict these cute little retro trailers.
Oh,
So
these
that's,
are so great.
aren't they? Adorable.
Yes.
If I had room for one, I'd probably get one just to have it, but I don't. I live in a cul-de-sac.
Oh,
Can you imagine riding with your kid in a motorcycle like that? Today, we would be horrified by that. But, you know, back then, it's like, ooh, cool.
Yes.
And that kitchen.
Oh, that kitchen.
Totally lusting over that kitchen. Those were the days, huh? So we have to bring style into our lives one way or the other. I guess today we tend to dress a little more casually, and we put a lot of that stylish, creative energy into our quilts.
Yes.
And of course, Scandinavian design is very intertwined with the mid-century modern design trending.
Love these. Mushrooms.
Yeah, oh man, mushrooms are a big trend right now in textile design too. And you have to mention Marimekko, of course, when you're talking about Scandinavian design. It's interesting, you know, we see trends overlapping. So here, Marimekko designed what they felt was an African print. So it's interesting to see that globalization, you know, how trends will intermix and become kind of a third new thing.
It's a small world these days.
Very. And then, you know, the 70s, and that's another rabbit hole we could go down another time, but this is just a little reminder of what the 70s were like. The colors, the clothes, the music, the hair.
The hair.
Yes.
I had a fro back then in the 70s, Luana.
Did you? Oh,
yeah,
I did my senior year of high school too. I tried that out for a year or so.
Yeah.
Poor Bob Ross, you know, let's go back to this for a second. Did you know that Bob Ross permed his hair, and then his, you know who I'm talking about, Bob Ross with his happy little clouds. And there's a licensed fabric collection that just came out of Bob Ross, by the way, in the last couple of weeks. So I read that he permed his hair, and then his popularity just exploded, and he was told that he had to keep perming his hair. He had to keep the afro, and he just hated it, poor guy. But even today, you just see the silhouette of the afro, and you know it's Bob Ross.
That is so funny.
It is. Well, and I'm just going to mention a couple other influences here. Obviously, G-Spend has been a huge influence. I picked out a couple, yeah, that had some colors pointing towards the path that I'm going down right now. And Nancy Crow, obviously. And a couple things that really reminded me of these mid-century modern geometric quilts and colors.
Yeah.
And now we're at QuiltCon. So I like to show these two together. This was at the entrance to the applique category. The picture on the right is a mural. When you walked out the front of the convention center, this was a mural on the side of a restaurant facing the convention center, and obviously very similar.
Very. Wow.
So we'll just start out walking through the exhibit. And I'm going to point out to you that this exhibit, if you've never been to this exhibit, and particularly if you're thinking about submitting a quilt, the pipe and drape is a very light gray. So if you create a white or light gray or beige quilt that hangs on this light gray background, guess what's going to happen? It's going to disappear into the pipe and drape. It's very different from other shows that have like a black pipe and drape. So I like to tell quilters, you know, think about where you're submitting it and what it's going to look like on that background. As a photographer, you know, I go to photograph the show and I'll see the same quilt at two shows. And it's just shocking to me how a quilt will be noticed in one show and completely passed over in the other. And obviously a black modern quilt with a few splashes of color would disappear in Houston. And maybe they like that. Maybe they want that effect. So anyway, it's just something to think about.
It's a good point.
Right. Think about this quilt hanging on a black background.
Yeah.
And down on the right there, that was Victoria's exhibit. And I think that quilt you have in your collection now.
Mm-hmm. One of her double wedding ring series.
Mhm.
Victoria Finley Wolf. Yeah.
Mhm. So I will be showing you individual quilts, but I just wanted you to have a sense of what it's like to be at the show. And even the floor is gray. It's a cement floor. They don't put a padded or a carpeted flooring down. So there's nothing to really distract from the color. It's just a completely gray background. And so the colors pop unless you've created a gray or beige quilt.
Yeah. Wow, that really pops against that, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're
color.
gonna look at that one a little bit later. But this quilt in the front here reminds me of some of that architecture and some of the textile prints.
Definitely.
There's that cathedral window. So I don't know if you picked up on this, but there are a lot of secondary colors in mid-century modern design, like, orange and all the different subheadings of orange, like peach and salmon and so on. And the same thing with green and purple. Those are all secondary colors. And also I would say turquoise and aqua. There's sort of tertiary colors. So primary color would be red, blue, and yellow. And then the colors in between are the secondary colors.
Mm-hmm. There's that crazy electric green.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, in both these quilts on the right, even with that blue, but isn't it interesting? They're of the same family, but so different.
And the quilt on the left kind of reminds me of that It's a Small World collage of shapes that I pointed out to you.
Yeah. This one, I think, shows just how incredibly powerful that color is, because you obviously have the words too, which are very powerful and really capture you, but that overall color is really just, it tells you there's something there to read and to pay attention to.
And, activism in quilts is such a huge trend. And I think now that things are changing in Washington, that is going to be unleashed. And I think that we are all going to have permission to say with words or color or other visual images, things that we might have felt a little shy about saying before. So this is a great example of that.
I love that.
Yep. So
I do love that clean look of black and white. It's something that my eyes really attracted to.
And there's that zigzag too.
And the zigzag.
All right, well, we're going to keep walking through because I want to make sure that I have time to go through the individual quilts. I'm going to show you a lot of these individually. Okay, so I just want to point out some of these individual quilts. I notice that I keep coming back to the quilts that are made by Julie Smith. Here's another one. And I think I have a third one later as we continue along.
Wow.
So think about shapes and colors. Think about symmetry versus asymmetry. This is a young man who lives in the UK, and I actually saw this quilt for the first time in Birmingham. And it turns out that my chiropractor's receptionist is best friends with him here in Boulder, Colorado. It's so weird what a small world it is,
And masterful use of color, really masterful in all these pieces. They really are obviously very aware of how color works next to one another and the context of what they're presenting.
So this show was 9 months ago, and I found that when I went back through all the images, I picked out, well, some of the images, I've given this presentation in a slightly different form before, but I found that as these trends progress, you know, they're changing, they're always changing. So when I want to show all of you, you know, real forward-leading trends, there are some things that I take out because they're getting to the end of their trendish life. And there are other things that I added in. So here we see all these different iterations of orange with a mid-tone and dark gray backdrop.
And I like the way the color is used in so many different ways, in the small scale and the large scale, and just the whole overall. That repetition of form is really great.
Yeah, good point. I thought this was very clever. It's a giant thumbprint with that, it's like a turquoise tiny bias, I think, on a yellow-green background with very dense parallel ruler stitching, right? Ruler work.
Nice.
And that's why I showed you all of those mid-century musical components, because I wanted to get a laugh out of this one.
Yeah, we saw that transistor, didn't we? That pink one.
Do you remember this song? It was the Go-Go's. We got
yes, I remember
that was
that
a Go-Go song. Yeah.
You got the beat. Yeah, I won't sing it.
And then this one and the next one are kind of interesting comparison. So, you know, a use of analogous colors with a neutral backdrop and different values. And then here's a similar idea, right? So it's interesting to see how, you know, we react to these design ideas and then we take it 1 or 2 or 3 steps further and we interpret in different ways. Now, this is not the quilt maker, but this is a woman who wandered past while I was photographing this quilt, and she perfectly matched. And I asked her if I could take her picture. She said yes.
That is very funny.
Isn't it funny? I mean, her purse and her dress and everything. Those are the moments that you live for when you're photographing a show. I love doing that when I go to the Tokyo Quilt Festival, when somebody is like leaning into a quilt and looking really close, and they love the quilt and their jacket matches the quilt and they almost blend in.
And we have such an instinctive reaction to color. I don't know that we're always completely aware of it, but then you see somebody who's looking really captivated by a quilt that matches what they're wearing. And you can see how they are just unconsciously, or maybe consciously, but they really are drawn to those colors.
We do that.
Yes.
This is an Australian artist, and I you know, in particular, I like to call out when I can artists from other countries when their work is expressing their culture, you know. They're just a different, I mean, obviously different countries and different parts of the world have different color trends. I kind of joke about this one. This is the Olympic circles on crack. But it's a very masterful use of this idea of interlocking and sort of transparent layered circles, abstract circles.
Yeah, nice.
And there's an activist quilt. When you first see it, you think, oh, a pretty, you know, candy pink, really sweet quilt. And then you look, resist. And so, you know, she's very clever. So it's all this piecing, machine piecing. You can't really see it, but then there's hand stitching on top. And then she used this really, you know, sort of unicorn and fairies type font for her words. And then you have to look at it for a minute and realize what it means. So you have...
Is there just I noticed most of these are solid color. Is that kind of one of the elements we typically see in modern quilts, or is it just that people really like that clean look of it, or what's the impetus behind that?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, that's been happening from the beginning. There was a lot of encouragement to use solid or simple prints. I think that that's changing. One of the things I mentioned was the use of gradient prints. For a long time, people thought you couldn't use batiks or hand dyes, which I talked to Jackie Gehring, and she said that's absolutely not true. You know, people think that you can't do applique and have it be a modern quilt. That's absolutely not true. So there have been, over the years, misconceptions, which hopefully by now have been cleared up. But there is a lot of solid color for sure, but it doesn't have to be a modern quilt.
It does create a really great clean line.
It does, yeah. Well, and that really clean, pure design aesthetic. And of course, with black and white, you know, it is what it is.
Yes,
It's the purity of the black and white that creates this kind of impact when you look at it. Two very different approaches, but both of them very striking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, kind of a simple idea of red and white, but when you look at it for a minute, you realize this is actually a group quilt. And it's not just red and white, but it's all different shades of red combined with white with spontaneous piecing. So each one of those sections is made by a different person. And I thought they did a brilliant job of bringing it together, because, you know, you could bring together sections like this in a way that wouldn't work. But this does.
The darker reds give it such depth, and
Exactly.
It's really lovely to see how they do that all in the same family of color.
Right. And so that's another concept, is using different values of one kind of color. You know, maybe some of them are a little warmer, a little cooler, but generally they're all pretty close to the same temperature. And then with the contrast of white, it's very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Now here's something completely different, and you kind of feel like, oh, maybe this is that overlap with the 70s, right?
Yeah.
There's the orange.
Nice.
This is all appliqued, but make a note of the stitching. It's interesting, the shapes in the orange applique are echoed in the stitching. So it's not really, you know, empty negative space. It's actually very dense and ornate, embellished negative space. Some modern quilts, yeah, some modern quilts have a lot of that dense parallel stitching, but this is very ornate.
Mm-hmm.
This is another one that it looks like a simple design, but if you look closely, there are parallel lines of stitching, hand stitching, like kantha stitching.
Mm-hmm.
Another very powerful black and white with a retro kind of mint green background.
It's so architectural. It really looks like those slides you showed us earlier. Wow.
So here's parallel stitching, but it also radiates out on the top section, right? It's parallel horizontal lines on the bottom, and then sort of a radiant parallel stitching on the top part.
I love that.
It may take you a minute to realize that this really has a complementary color story. So it glows because of the value change, right? Because it goes from dark to light and back to dark, but also the lightest parts have these hints of kind of a pale greeny yellow color.
And I like the contrast in the quilting stitches. Though the deeper colors have that very linear pattern that really makes them even deeper in a way.
Oh, that's a good catch. I hadn't noticed that. Good point. You and I make a great team, Carolyn. We got to do this more often. Now, this artist is also from Australia, and I really felt like I could see that, you know, the big blue sky, the red rocks, the golden sun.
It's vibrant like Australia.
Exactly. And again, you know, another interpretation of orange.
You know, and the use of white in these color or in these quilts is so fascinating because it's like it gives your eye someplace to focus so you don't get overwhelmed by all that movement. And but it also creates its own dynamic kind of feel too.
Mm-hmm. It's like a structure, like an architectural
Yeah.
structure that you can hang the rest of the colors and design from. I think you had remarked on this quilt in one of those shots where it was hanging.
Mm-hmm.
Very visually
So bold.
powerful.
So
Yeah.
powerful.
And again, it's that combination of their complementary colors, their different values, goes all the way from light to dark. And it's really, the analogous colors that go all the way from yellow to orange to hot pink and then jumps into that complementary violet. Very effective.
That's kind of a classic pattern, isn't it? That
Mm-hmm.
interlocking shape, but really the color is beautiful in it, the
Mm-hmm.
shading.
Yeah, I find it very soothing. Your eye just naturally, it's like you're a marble in a maze and you're dropping down.
Yes.
So guess what? Now we're going to visit your museum. Yay!
Yes.
And I hope that everybody's had a chance to visit the museum. It's such a beautiful space, and of course the exhibits are always top notch. And if you have a chance to go on a tour to look at how they care for the quilts, how they're archived, that is truly fascinating. But I wanted to finish by showing several of the modern quilts that are in IQM's collections. So this is one that Leslie Levy, the executive director, sent to me, and that was right on. This is the Mad Man Quilt, right?
It is, isn't it?
All the suits and ties.
Yes. And it feeds into it not only in just the suit and tie idea, but the repetition of the shapes and the color and the gradation. It works on so many levels.
Mm-hmm.
Such a great piece.
Yeah, very whimsical.
Yes.
And I feel like this is like if that quilt melted, this would be that same quilt melted.
You're right.
But in a positive way. But it reminds me of men's ties. All of those overlapping stripes with little touches of red in all the different values of gray. And of course, it's not just values of gray, but I see hand dyes and patterns in there. So I would imagine seeing this in person is quite an experience.
I just feel like it just has such a great sense of movement, and it's so dynamic because your eye just, when you look at it, you're just always looking further and looking deeper into it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Kathy York.
Mm-hmm.
I love puzzles. So I sat down one day because this is a hidden message. It's exactly what it is. It's actually an Emerson poem.
Oh.
And I thought, I could look up a poem and kind of figure, but I loved playing the game. And so
Are you going to tell us or give us a hint?
I could tell you, I do have it. I pulled it up and it says, it's a great quote. It says, "Do not say things. What you are stands over you all the while and thunders so that I cannot hear what you say to the contrary."
Wow.
So it's just about that communication.
I would have no idea how to translate this quilt into that poem.
I love crosswords, and honestly, you just have to start identifying which color is which. And if you do crossword puzzles, you're always looking for words that have certain repetition or a lot of vowels, or there's little hints like that in it.
Okay.
It took me a while though.
Well, thank you for helping us out with that. But I had to pick this one out because it really reminds me of the architecture we looked at, all those colors we've been looking at.
Nice.
When I picked these out, so I would just want to let our audience know that I was sent a group of quilts, and I picked out the quilts that related to the presentation I had already prepared. I didn't know the names when I first picked them out, but I always get a chuckle when I see who it is because I do know a lot of the artists. And yeah, this is Thomas. I ended up picking a couple of his, but you can see that yellow-green with these pops of color. And, especially I'm looking at the purple here. The purple is what really speaks to me against that yellow-green. And again, we see all the You know, it's not a repetitious geometric, it's kind of a random geometric. There's squares and L and U shapes, different colors, different orientations.
Yeah, and I like this. I like the use of the prints in this because they're small enough pieces, I guess maybe they still read as those colors to me.
Mm-hmm.
I love this one.
Yeah, and again, you know, we saw this kind of design in architecture and textile design earlier in the presentation.
It just has such a great movement to it. And I also, you know, gosh, I played pickup sticks as a kid all the time. I loved it. And so
Mm-hmm.
it just, this one just really kind of calls to me in interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, think about how this quilt would show on a light gray background as opposed to a black background.
It'd be a very different effect.
Yeah, different experience, right?
It's such a good point, Luana. And honestly, I think I react to quilts like that, but I've never really thought about how much of a difference that if you want a quilt to be shown and perhaps to win an award, you really do want to think about what kind of background you're working
Yeah.
with.
So at the museum, do you paint the walls different colors for different exhibits for that reason?
You know, we use color accents. We can't paint our walls every time. It's just
Okay.
gets too difficult. And it's a lot of time between while we have to let the paint rest and all that. But we use pops of color on our movable walls because those we can paint as much as we like. And so we really find that using color in a careful way kind of pulls everything together.
Mm-hmm.
But our walls tend to be kind of right now we're at a kind of a true gray and a little bit of a darker gray. And we like that better than just the white. And a lot of the reason probably is because a lot of our traditional quilts have a white background.
Right. Yeah.
So you need that contrast.
Makes sense. Well, that's why I have a kind of a medium dark gray behind me so I can hang quilts. If you see my picture of where I am here in my office, it's a great backdrop for quilts for sure. Here we see that yellow green. We see the use of the gray. We see the midtones, and we also see movement and luminosity through value. And I think I picked a couple of Heather's quilts from your collection.
Yeah, I think that she has a certain kind of shape she uses. In this one, though, it's the color I think that draws me. And I just love this piece so much because you get a sense of a place in it. To me, it's probably that kind of green and then the colors of nature, but I feel like I'm kind of almost walking into kind of a field, or I think it's actually a marsh that Heather talks about with this quilt. And so it just has such a presence to it somehow.
Yeah, I can imagine this is another quilt that you would have quite an experience in person.
Yes.
Yeah. Here's another one by Thomas Nauer. And again, I just thought it was so interesting to see those colors that came up. Now, I know that modern quilts tend not to have borders. This does have a border on it. But against a white background, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it'd be a really good thing to have that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
This really has a sense of depth because of the floating squares, right?
Yes.
And those are getting into more of what we'd call those 70s colors, to me anyway.
It's interesting how you associate certain things with colors, because when I look at this, my first thought is it's just like a fall extravaganza with all those colors that you'd see in the leaves and
yeah,
you know, the pumpkin spice and all that. It just really evokes a very specific time frame for me.
For sure. It's very rich.
Yes.
Oh, I misspelled that when I typed it in. Sorry about that. But I thought the title was funny.
It is funny. And look at how she just creates so much movement with the way she's chopped her lines. I love that.
Yeah. So it's interesting, you know, it's a modern quilt, but it's a jagged little pill of a modern quilt, right?
Yeah, we could sing that song too.
Yeah, we could. But they probably don't want us to.
Probably not.
Here's another one by Heather. Very different from the other one, the green marsh.
Yes.
That was my husband just waving goodbye. I'm here at the office right now. Okay, and I think this is the last one that I picked out. And this to me reminds me so much of that furniture that we looked at, right? Those chairs with the round edges.
So much like it.
Yeah. But it's not solid, it's hand dyes. So here's a great example of a quilt that can be a modern quilt and not be made from solids. And of course, you know, she calls it blue veil. So she's showing us transparency by using value. Yeah, so that's the end of my little presentation. I just want to invite everybody, in case you haven't visited eQuilter, to check us out. We have a really fun newsletter that goes out a few times a week. We have 120,000 subscribers, so we must be doing something right there.
I'm relying on your posts, Liana. I'm on reading them, and they are so thoughtful and so encouraging. I'm relying on them right now.
Oh, on Wednesdays, I send out something called the Midweek Creative Nudge. And lately I've been trying to send out things that are more inspiring and comforting, because we're going through tough times. But fortunately, we're going through it together. We have the quilt community to bind us together. I have all these photos, the quilt photos and more, on my Flickr page. So if you just go to flickr.com and type in my name, Luana Rubin, you'll be able to find that easily. We do have a blog. If you miss our newsletters, you can check out our blog. We have lots of videos from shows. So if you're missing like interviews with showing lots of different exhibits and artists and celebrities and so on, that may fill your time once you've gone through everything that Netflix has to offer. So that is the end of my presentation. We can see if we have any questions or comments.
Yes, we had lots of comments. We didn't have so many questions as we did people just really appreciating some of the images you were showing and talking about how they responded to them. One person was really interested in knowing more about the buildings, and there were so many of them, I don't think we could name them, but where did you find those for your presentation? I thought those were really, really cool too.
That was part of my original presentation for the very first QuiltCon, and I just Googled modern architecture. Literally, that was it. So you too can look for, you know, all these things that I look for. If you get kind of a bug in your ear and you think, wow, I'm really inspired, I want to go look at Mad Men design or modern architecture, things like that, just go Google. And you know, I have a file of ideas and inspirations that I keep. And then when I give a presentation, I go through and say, oh yeah, this would go in there. And I'm sure all of you do that too, where you save images and colors and so on in an inspiration file. So yeah, have fun with that.
Yeah, and I will mention, you know, I'm on the board of the Studio Art Quilt Associates, and I know you're a member, Luana. They are, our seminar this year is going to be on color and the use of color, and I'm working on a presentation for that. And I literally have never spent that much time just kind of going online and looking for resources and trying to just make sure. I'm actually calling it color theory is like mayonnaise, which is a quote from Jane Dunewald's website and her blog. And she just talks about the fact that, you know, we are surrounded by this all the time, and we really don't understand it or how we respond to it or how to use it. And so I would say, you know, getting online and looking at the sources you can find on any topic, it's just been a revelation. And I think you can really learn and maybe, you know, just develop a better understanding of what you respond to and what you feel, the context of the color and how it works together. So.
Well, I am also doing something regarding color for SAQA. I'm going to be recording an interview with Martha talking about the color marketing group and how do we identify color trends. So those of you who are SAQA members, you can watch for that in the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it'll be exciting. And I think that's just something that, you know, as I'm looking at quilts from all across time, I'm always inspired. And like this, the quilt you showed today, there are color combinations in there that I would say, no, that doesn't work. But if you look at it and you begin to think of that color wheel and how these things, I mean, it just opens up your whole world. And then you really can use, and you can make so much more dynamic quilts, I think, if you really understand, or maybe just not understand, but just push yourself to use new colors, color combinations.
Well, and I really encourage everybody to go look at my Flickr page. I think I have 16,000 photos from my travels, and last time I looked, I had 4 million visits. So I know a lot of people go and check that out. So please take advantage of that, especially, like I said, during these times. And will this talk be available on your website?
It will be. We've recorded it tonight, so you can go back and you can watch it and you can look at those great images. I thought that was so much fun to see all those great color combinations and just items from that time period, because it really does make you think, where am I bringing color in my life? Am I being too safe? Am I trying something that would be a little bit different? And I think it was really inspiring and really fun to see, Luana.
Oh, good.
And I think a lot of people have said that. We have so many people here tonight. We have well over 100 people that have been online tonight.
Oh, wow.
And there's so many great positive messages of people who've really enjoyed it and really enjoyed seeing all of your photographs, Luana.
Oh, wonderful.
So not so many questions, but people who were just saying how much they enjoyed it and how much it kind of reminded them of some things from their past too. So.
Oh, that's great.
And lots of people from all over the world. Isn't that great?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, then I will just say thank you to all of you for joining us. It's such a pleasure to be able to meet with you and share. And that's how I get my kicks, is, you know, sharing the photos that I've taken in my travels and being able to share them with other people to further their creative inspiration.
You know, we all miss each other and miss seeing each other at all these events. And so it's just so nice to be online and have a chance to just chat like this and enjoy this. And, you know, it's exactly what I think we need. And I think it really, for me, I really feel inspired. I feel like it's time to get home and just pull some fabric out and play. So I think it was great. So.
Okay, I'm going to do that too. So let's all go straight to our studios.
Sounds perfect. Well, thank you so much, Luana. You are such a great friend to the museum, to our organization. You sponsor so many of our exhibitions, and we just couldn't do it without you. And I'm so excited. Your latest exhibition that we had for the Love of Gaia is traveling to the UK next year, and hopefully even a little further. And that is so gratifying that that wonderful show is going to travel further. You can see the show for the Love of Gaia on our website. So if you want to go see, I think you had such a stellar group of artists in that show. So go back and take a look at that. We keep all of our exhibitions online, and once they're done, we put them in the past folder so you can go back, and another great place for some inspiration.
Yes, and I'll just mention that For the Love of Gaia was really an environmental activist message. I gathered together a group of artists. They had all expressed to me over the past several years that I've known them about their concern for what's happening to the environment. So I said, hey, would you like to participate in this? And they said yes. And I agree. We had some incredible artists in that exhibit, and I'm very grateful that they were willing to participate, and also that the museum could host us. So anyway, thank yous all around. Sending all of you love and hugs. We all need lots of extra love and hugs right now, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Luana, and thank you everybody who came tonight, and we'll see you again very soon.
Hope so. Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.